Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
I'm stuck. He's what you get with his honestly.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody, welcome on in. It's another edition of Mode Push, an American view of F1, our F1 podcast that has become our baby. And, boy, I tell you what a fun race it was last week. And I guess in terms of a Monaco standard race, we had about as much excitement as you could get without there being red flags and 10 cars into the walls, and between qualifying and the qualifying laps that were put in by Max Verstappen and Fernando Alonso. I mean, we were treated over the weekend. And yet, at the same time, I still felt like the race lacked something. Joining us, of course, as usual, my co-host, Dan Jimenez, on the program. Dan, what's up, man?
I am just relishing in a great weekend. It was awesome. I thought it was a great race. It was one bad strategy call by Aston Martin short of being an epic race. Yeah, but it was a great weekend.
You know, I think everybody asked afterward because so you had Max Verstappen, of course, on the top of the podium. Just another masterclass by this guy, and I'm not going to be one of those guys that calls him a Dutch master. I'm not going to do that because everybody gets roped into that, and I'm not going to do it. But another insane weekend from him, and because of that performance, the lack of performance by Checo Perez ended up being, that contrast was made even more difficult, I think, for him and his team in that garage. But because I think if you were going to expect something epic, it would have been inter-team, right? I mean, that's what I thought we were going to be looking at. But Fernando Alonso with his second-place finish and just continues to wow and just awesome. But the rain came out for, albeit a brief moment, in Monaco, and so you got first, I don't think anybody picked this podium, mostly because of the third-place finisher, right? But first place, Max Verstappen. Second place, Fernando Alonso. And then Esteban Ocon getting a little bit of, he drove a heck of a race. I mean, I think that he made sure that if anything was going to happen, he covered it all up. And so it was a pretty epic move by the Alpine driver, and Alpine continues to kind of improve steadily as well. But Fernando Alonso, what was the strategy mess that I guess people kind of were like, hey, you stayed on the slicks, everybody else was going to inters. If he would have gone out on inters one lap before, is that kind of the idea that he would have given himself a little bit more of a shot?
Yeah, so to set the stage, Alonso was running the hards and Max started on the mediums. So Alonso was going to be able to run longer into the race than Max anyways. Now, Max was doing, when it was all dry, Max was doing an incredible job keeping his lap times up and kind of keeping that 8-second buffer to Alonso. But it was still going to get, if the race had stayed dry and those guys had done their pit stops and Alonso had gone to mediums and Max to hard, I think it could have been really interesting. But the rain came, and it was only raining in that second sector, and it was dry everywhere else. So all the teams were just kind of waiting to see, is this just going to pass real quickly? Because there's the trade-off point. In the end, what tires you're going to be on, it's just a question of lap time. You're just sitting there looking, okay, what's the overall lap time? How much time are we losing to the people around us? And so, yeah, even though everyone, when they were on their slicks, was losing time in that hairpin second sector because they were on slicks, they were gaining or keeping their time quick up over the other two sectors that they hadn't hit that changeover point yet.
Sure.
And I feel like there were maybe a couple of other back markers who had switched to inters before Alonso pit, but the whole race, Red Bull had been going to be the ones that were going to pit first because they were on the medium tires. And so I think Alonso and Aston Martin were trying to maybe preempt something and catch Max off strategy. And so they pit about a lap after the rain started, and they had cut when the rain started. Max started driving very conservatively, and Alonso was catching him a few seconds per lap. And about a lap or two after, Alonso pits, and there were other people taking inters at that point, and Aston Martin puts him on the mediums, thinking that the rain was going to pass very quickly. Now he comes out on the mediums. Max is still on his old mediums, and Alonso still catches him. I think over the next 2 laps, he caught him by like 10 seconds or something.
Sure, yeah.
Max puts on the inters, but then the rain was really coming down, and Aston Martin had to come back in, put inters on because they were going to be losing too much time. So the question that everyone's asking is, if Aston Martin had put inters on in the first pit stop, would Alonso have gotten around Max? And on the broadcast, Martin Brundle said no, but as people have gone back and done the analysis and like taken the average lap times of, I think, Hamilton and a few others that had gone out in those particular laps on inters compared to Max's time, yes, like Alonso would have gotten past Max if they had made the quote unquote right call in hindsight and only pit once for inters, because it was just insane. Max was losing the qualifying lap around Monaco was like a minute 14 or something, right? And then in the race, under dry conditions, they were running like a minute 18. And then like when the rain came, they were running like 2-minute laps. Like the delta between the dry and the wet when you're on those slicks is insane. Like you can make up, even though Max is 10, 20 seconds behind Max, if he's 20 seconds a lap faster than Max and he undercuts him by just 2 laps, by going to the inters while Max is still out on those mediums, like he absolutely gets around Max. So I think hindsight being 2020, Aston Martin should have definitely put on the inters, and I think he would have gotten around Max, and Max wouldn't have been able to get past him because Max was driving so conservatively. He did not want to pull what everyone else was doing, like Logan Sargent and Lance Stroll and everybody just like hydroplaning into the wall and breaking his front wing, which would have been, essentially the end of his race. So he was being hyper conservative. Alonso was able to be more aggressive. And yeah, just missed opportunity, but like hand it to Max for driving to the conditions, to Red Bull for making the right call. And, Max didn't put it in the wall when he stayed out the longest on those slick tires in the rain.
The rest of the race kind of was, I think that, it's kind of all over the place. What's funny is that Mercedes actually had a decent weekend with a 4 or 5 finish, I guess. People are still kind of trying to figure out whether or not they're fast, and that's a hard track to figure it out. Monaco just is not the place where you're going to go, wow, look at how look at how our upgrades have worked for us. Obviously, Spain this weekend is going to be a little bit more of that place. I love the idea that everybody's going to go to Spain here. Some upgrades are going to be anticipated. Some upgrades were added to the cars last week, and yet we're not really going to see it until this weekend in Barcelona. But this is a track that everybody knows better than any other track in all of the races across the board, because they all do their testing here. They've done more laps and more miles on that track than any other track, and so it's going to be really interesting to see how these upgrades have worked. Now, your guys, the Ferrari team, the team that you're so devoted to, Dan. A 6th and 8th place finish for Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, respectively. And I don't know if you knew this tidbit of information, but a record was broken this weekend. And it's kind of weird because on the one hand, it's not. I think it's a little bit more of a diss than it would be exciting. But in F1 history, Carlos Sainz set the record for most 8th place finishes all time in F1. That is just something to really write home about. Most 8th place finishes. And you know who's behind him is
good for him.
And who's got 20 all time 8th place finishes, which, hey, you know what? That's in the points. So, there's the one part where you go, that's hilarious, but it is also Ferrari, and 8th place finishes don't really go over well for the Tifosi. But their 8th place finishes, 19th or 2nd place all time, Nico Hülkenberg. So he could run him down if he ends up having a few extra 8th place finishes this year. And I think Haas would be like, please give us more 8th place finishes. Surprises, though? I want to throw out one surprise, which was Lando Norris scoring a couple points. And I remember listening to from McLaren after the race, and he was just absolutely dogging this car that he's in. He is still just like, yeah, it was fun, I guess. I got a couple points, but who's that happy when you get ninth place, but you're a lap and a half down. Like this is the state where that McLaren is in right now. They get a double points finish technically with Lando getting ninth and Oscar Piastri getting 10th, and so they got a couple of points. And so you can like thumbs up, but at the same time, I don't know. I mean, he just seems so. It seems so like ominous, like the way he's talking about this car. I don't know if he's going to want to stick around till 2025. I think that the love fest between he and Zach Brown can't last that long, because when you're finishing 8th and 9th and it's like the best you can do, it felt like that's the best you can do on a car that just is not going that well. So teams like McLaren, teams like Ferrari underperforming. Mercedes is just kind of sticking around, doing with their fourth and fifth place finishes with George and Lewis. I'm not sure that there's a worse performance though than Sergio Perez this weekend, who was 14 points down on his teammate going into the weekend, puts it in the wall in Q1. Ends up starting last on the grid, which, of course, in Monaco means you're going to end up toward the end of the grid unless there's a massive disaster, which there was not. And he just, I mean, now no one, and I think it's highlighted too. I read a quote by Max. They were asking him, they said, "Hey, who on the grid do you love as a driver that's not yourself?" And he goes, "Yeah, hands down, Fernando Alonso." And so he throws that out there. He's got a teammate like that's hanging out there in second place. Like, what about me? And he's just like the dedication he has and just the fight that he's got and just the ability to be able to do what he does. And it's like, dude, everybody knows that you're not that impressed with your teammate, and your teammate was abysmal this weekend. And that, like, unless he can put something crazy together, Sergio Perez is trending so far behind now between his last two races, and especially this last one, after winning last year to going to, basically dead last this year. I think he's finished 16th, but that was with a couple of DNFs in there. And you beat Logan Sargent. Good for you. That's just an awful weekend for Checo. I feel bad for the guy, but at the same time, he's not driving real well with that piece of equipment underneath him.
Yeah, I mean, how fast do fortunes change in F1? Was weeks ago we were singing his praises and saying he's going to be fighting for the championship, and then 2 bad weeks or 2 bad races, race weekends in a row, and yeah, he's now, the rumors are flying around. Well, is Daniel Ricciardo still going to come in and replace him mid-season or something? But he had the hard part about this weekend is there were just unforced errors. They weren't reliability problems on the part of the car or the team. It was all Sergio's fault. He just made these mental mistakes. And I think one of the biggest parts of this weekend was Sergio's wreck in Q1 that required them to crane it up into the air, out of the way of the track. And these teams all have photographers at these corners where these cranes are, because they've been to Monaco before. They know how this works, that if somebody wrecks there, the car's going to go up in the air, and then you get the very rare glimpse, what did Toto call it, underneath the skirt of the cars. You get the quick glimpse up the skirt.
there was a moment where you go, these guys are looking at this. This is like the hottest lady that's ever been out there. When you see the guys that you see some lady walk into the room, and it's like the old cartoons, where the construction workers are whistling. People are more interested in the underneath part of that Red Bull car. And my favorite shot was somebody showed this still of Adrian Newey. And he's sitting there, and he's just like, oh gosh, everybody is seeing my work, my perfection gone. Oh, I think it was him. Is it Adrian Newey, the guy, the aero expert? Yeah,
Newey.
Yeah. So everybody's like, look at this guy. He's freaking out because he's going, I had one thing that was going for me, and it was the aero package underneath that floor. And of course, everybody's just going to copy off of that, right? And that could make a real difference for some excitement this season.
I think that accelerates everyone's timeline on developments to catch up to Red Bull, at least on the aero concept, by 6 months. Like, I think it is a huge deal for everyone to see up there, because it was described on the broadcast as like a totally mental design. Like it was just so more extreme and out there than what everybody else was running in terms of just the shape of the floor, the dimensions, all of that was just so different that Helmut Marko was quoted as saying, like, okay, everybody got to see it, but like they can't really just copy it and then have the same performance, because he's right. Like, it's all part of a greater package. But I think once people see that and they okay, like this is the concept, then the other teams will be able to adapt to it. And so, Mercedes went up in the air, with Lewis's crash. A lot fewer people were interested in that, but it's a brand new floor. So, and they're Mercedes, you're going to pay attention. But everyone being able to see the underside of that car, with which you rarely ever get to see. This is really the only circumstance in which you get to see the underbody of a car, is when it gets craned up into the air. That was a big deal that a lot of the teams are putting in, I'm sure, big hours this weekend. And it'll take months. It might not be until next year's car that some of these teams can implement those concepts, but it definitely accelerates the timeline of everybody catching up to Red Bull.
Well, it's interesting because you go, well, and people who are new to the sport, myself kind of included, I go, what does it really matter that much? But it does take a long time to actually kind of, put it in the wind tunnel and see what it could do. And then on the flip side, Red Bull has less wind tunnel time this year because of their cost cap penalty from last year. But it's funny, too, because you go online and you look at a lot of what people are putting out there about F1. I mean, even as they're going into Barcelona today and they're doing some of their first you get some of your first glimpses at the cars, because they do bring upgrades. And all they do is look at the difference of the wing this weekend. And it's minute changes that these cars are making, and you're going, oh, look at what Red Bull has on the edge of their floor now for Barcelona. Oh, look what Mercedes is doing. And somebody took a shot of, I think, the Ferrari floor and kind of the attachments to the side pod, and they're like, look at this little change. And it was just like this minute thing that everyone's just like drooling over. They go, oh, this is the weekend that they're going to do it. And that's what I love about this sport, is just like the constant. From week to week, you can change your car just a little bit, and from track to track, from circuit to circuit, it does make a difference. And these guys, love it or hate it, the idea of these cars not being spec, all one kind of design and has to do the same thing. That's the kind of cool part of it too. Some people hate it. I've learned to kind of like it, and I know you love it, Dan, where this is like this idea of just innovating constantly, and this race to be not just the best driver on the grid, but to have these folks back at the factory who are these aero geniuses and weight geniuses and technical and engineering geniuses. And so that's the fun stuff about Spain, I think, that you can look at and go, all right, they're going to bring a little something different to all these. And then you just cross your fingers and go, please be a little bit closer of a race, because I don't want to see – because this circuit, you correct me if I'm wrong, this has the possibility for being one of those really boring races. If Red Bull is that much more ahead of everybody else, you could have Max winning by 52 seconds.
Yeah, there is definitely that chance with just it being an average high downforce track that, yeah, any little bit of advantage that Red Bull has on straight line speed and high speed cornering downforce, like that's just going to give them a big advantage at Spain. This last weekend we saw some upgrades, especially Mercedes brought a bunch of upgrades with their new side pods, but we didn't see as many as we're going to see going into Spain. Especially Ferrari is coming with a new set of upgrades and rumored new side pods that are going to match Red Bull's design, which Mercedes also did. So we'll see and get a much better sense of what have all these midseason upgrades brought this coming weekend. The other thing too is there's a bit of a redesign in the track. We talked about last episode where they took the chicane out of the last sector, so there's going to be a faster last sector, and that what's going to do is just going to increase tire wear. And it's already a track that has high tire wear, but it's going to get even worse. It's a hot track. We haven't really had a hot race yet. Miami was a little warm, but not as warm as it was last year. Mm-hmm. Monte Carlo, it rained, so we haven't really had a super high tire deg race yet, but it's like Spain will be if it doesn't rain. I saw like 30% chance of rain in the forecast, but if it's like normal Spain weather, it's going to be hot, high tire wear, probably two stop race, not these one stoppers that we've been having just because of the tire wear. So I think that could be really interesting. And these upgrades that Ferrari's bringing, that Mercedes is bringing with all the side pod stuff, does a lot for tire management. those guys have always had a hard time, or have recently had a hard time keeping up with Red Bull's tires, and how they can keep their lap time up and keep their tires healthy. And these changes on the downforce and aero side of things is really all about being able to baby the tires more. So hopefully that makes it more competitive.
I'm trying to think of some of the suckiest drivers who suck the most sucky. And Logan Sargent, our poor American friend, I think this, like, at some point, it's just, drinking from the fire hose, right? There's just a lot you have to take in. I mean, on the one hand, like, this was a difficult weekend. And to not put a car on the wall, that's, like, great or whatever, fun. I'm glad that he's having, he's not wrecking the car and making it, like, even more difficult to like the guy. But him, between he and, the other rookies, I think of, like, Nick DeVries, people are sort of looking at and going, there's a lot of underperforming, but, I mean, he did finish 12th, I guess. I was really disappointed that Yuki, who was, like, hanging out in 8th and 9th all day, ended up just tumbling down the order. And you and I, we share this kind of weird Yuki love for for the guy. And he just tumbled out of the points. He was in it all day. But he got outperformed for the first time by his teammate, Nick DeVries. But the worst, I think, this weekend has to be Lance Stroll, who just looked like the guy that everybody has attacked this dude. And every time he starts to come out of it, I mean, think about the broken wrists that he had the first race of the season, and he still put it together. And everybody's like, this guy, he doesn't need his dad. He's a racer on his own. But then you have his teammate who's just consistently one of the best on the grid. This car is outperforming even what their own standards were. They're like, this year's a gift. Everything is gravy for us. And yet, Lance Stroll in 20th puts it in the wall a couple of times, puts it into the side of a couple of cars a couple times. This guy looked as much of a rookie as anybody else out there.
Yeah, he's making mistakes that he shouldn't be making with the amount of experience and the quality of the car that he has. That very first lap, he tried to go on the outside of like 3 wide through the really small, like, double hairpin. Is just really stupid moves, and it exacerbated by the fact that Alonso is just like the second best car on the grid right now. I'm finally starting to see speculative articles out there on, like, could Lance actually really be replaced? Is Lawrence Stroll as much of a business savage as we think he is? And be like, if I could sign Lando Norris, I'm going to sign Lando Norris instead of Tommy Boy. And then Tommy Boy gets kicked to the curb.
Tommy Boy.
It's possible.
Oh, my gosh. Well, the guy, you know what? Other teams would look at him and go, well, maybe he'd be a better situation than what we have here, I guess. But at the same time, like, make him your reserve driver and have him pout in the back of the garage like every weekend. I don't know how this works. Or maybe you put him as, like, maybe you just kind of send him to early retirement and he's the assistant to the technical director. I don't know how that works. Yeah. But that's a guy who, man, if he doesn't turn it around, he's got to figure some things out here, because everybody sees how much. My favorite too is, like, that Fernando Alonso, in a weird way, instead of being the brutal teammate who doesn't care about anybody but himself, is like, no, you guys are really treating him poorly. Like, I can't believe you would say such things about my little brother. Like, and the reality is that Fernando just loves it. Like, if he were not performing as well as he was, like, he loves it. I mean, what you get P2s and P3s all the rest of the season, and you're going to finish second in the overall championship. You're going to get maybe that 33rd win if a foot gets put wrong by Red Bull one weekend, which, that's a high likelihood with another, 7 or how many races is it left? 17 races left. So I don't think that they're, Fernando, I think. And again, this is his weekend, man. This is Spain. He and Carlos Sainz, they're coming home here, and Carlos is, like, sweating it out. Fernando's coming back a freaking hero this weekend to Spain.
I have to think that there's something in Alonso's contract that he gets some sort of bonus for every nice thing he says about over the radio or in his interviews, because he's, like, for a dude that has been so savage with all the teammates he's ever had.
Yes.
Now all of a sudden he's just like, Lance is just he's great. there's something going up. I mean, but yeah, it just makes him look, I think, even better when he's outperforming his teammate by so much. So going back to Yuki, I think that was my soundbite of the weekend when Yuki's engineer got on the radio and said, like, dude, you're losing time. You're going to fall out of the points, and it's under braking. Like, you're losing a lot of time under braking. And Yuki just like string of expletives about how bad the brakes were.
It's like
these brakes are bleepity bleep bleep bleep. Yeah. And just like, well, no, there you go. There's the Yuki response.
I'd play it if this weren't a family show. You know, I mean, that's the thing about Yuki is like this guy when it was shades of Yuki of the past because he's been outperforming his teammate, his car a little bit, and so he's been looking more like a pro this last year. And when he started going. I mean, when they're not showing what's going on, when I'm just like looking at, you know, the order here and you see the interval times and everything, and you start to see him and you go, oh boy, did he just go from 8th to 11th, like in half a lap? And then he starts tumbling down even more. And that kind of frustration obviously is going to get to a guy, even who's been like going to therapy for all the cusses that he says all the time. But, you know, it is what it is. A quiet performance by Alpine this weekend. Well, not quiet in the sense that, you know, Ocon finishes third. I would imagine that Otmar Snaffauer is absolutely excited by the fact that they don't have to have McLaren maybe breathing down their neck nearly as much. That car is really, really quick. It's getting better. And a 3rd and 7th double points finish for them, their biggest haul of the year so far, is tremendous for them. Pierre Gasly quietly finishing in 7th and put in a heck of a race himself. So I think Alpine is right there. I think Ferrari should be worried because I don't think that the pace of that car with one of the best drivers on the grid finishing 6th and 5th every week it seems like now and just not putting it there and some of their strategy still being an issue. I don't know what the future is of Ferrari this year, even with all the pictures of the rear wing setup and the floors from Barcelona saying, oh, they brought some upgrades. I'm not sure how excited I am about Ferrari.
Yeah, they're at best 3rd fastest and at worst 5th fastest and probably closer to 5th than anything. And that's not where Ferrari should be by any means.
I'm going to have you do one of your famous explain it like I'm 5 engineering. When I see the tires go on, when I saw the rain start to come down, I went, ooh. I mean, I'm not the guy that wants to see a car go into the wall, but in Monaco, I kind of am just because I feel like that would help some of these crazy finishes and crazy podiums, which I always like. Instead, you had like everybody really driving very, very well. Even the bad drivers, I mean, save Lance, but I mean, like even the really quote unquote bad drivers who are still trying to get their feet under them. The quality of the F1 driver this year was highlighted by the fact that these guys on a very, very tough circuit where if the rain falls, it is really hard to stay on that track. They all started kind of, putting it together. Please explain how the inters and the wets work. There were a couple of turns on the track where everybody's like, "There's no way you can have some slicks on here," and obviously everybody at one point went to inters. But what's the real difference in terms of time loss versus water cleared when it comes to an inter versus a wet tire? Those are the green and blue tires that are used when the track is wet. So, what do you really get advantage wise out of the green and the blue tires when it comes to the wet surfaces?
Yeah, so the slicks are obviously slicks. There's zero tread on them, and they displace no water essentially from the tire. Then the intermediates, you could think about those as more of your high performance car that still has some tread on it. You're not taking it to the racetrack, but you want a little bit of a more high performance tire. And then you could think of your full wets as like your all season tire, your winter tire that you have on your car. So if you can envision what the tread difference looks like between those on the inters, the fewer grooves, different pattern, less aggressive pattern, shallower grooves, and then the full wets, obviously a bit more grooves, deeper, thicker, and the quantity of water that these two tires can displace. A full wet tire can displace twice as much water as an intermediate tire. And it's something like an intermediate tire can displace like 30 liters per second at a particular speed. And at the same the same speed. It's like 60 liters per second. I think that's what it is. And so I mean, this is like these cars can displace a ton of water when they've got the full wets on. Now, obviously, there's less grip. You have less surface of the tire that's actually in contact with the road on a full wet than an inter. So with less surface area contacting the road, it's just the cornering force that the car can hold is a lot less on the full wets. And so how teams decide what to use. So we saw it in the race at Monaco. It's starting to sprinkle. It's in one little spot. Like the slicks are going to be like driving on ice. But if it's only for 2 turns, you're going to make it all up on the rest of the lap.
Sure.
The inters will do great through that spot that it's, a little damp. Maybe there's no standing water, but when you get through the rest of the lap, it's going to heat up the tire a bunch. And because there's like less mass on the tire, like that heat is more extreme and hard on those tires. And so they'll wear more. And then the full wets, those you only really run the full wets when there's like standing water that you're worried about. And so we weren't quite seeing standing water. We were seeing shiny road surface, a little bit of foam here and there. So it was more clearly a situation at Monaco to just run the inters, especially when half the track is almost dry. But like we saw last year in Suzuka and the Japan GP, they started the race in full wets, and those tires just face so much water that's what causes the spray to go up into the air.
Yeah.
If you remember, there was
rooster tails,
like the rooster tails and like the helmet cameras where it was just you couldn't see anything. That's because of the quantity of water that the full wets are throwing off. And so I think Formula One is working on trying to figure out, like, we just run full wets not very often because it makes visibility so hard that like they might as well just red flag the race. It's like full wets are almost most appropriate when you wouldn't be racing at all. So they need to figure out some solution by either like changing the intermediate and full wet profiles, or adding some sort of wheel covers that you could put on the cars during full wet conditions to keep the rooster tails from getting into the other drivers' faces, which would be kind of crazy. So those are the basic differences. You give up lap time by going to intermediates and then to full wets overall as the track dries, but you gain lap time the wetter it gets. And the tire wear only becomes an issue on the intermediates and the full wets if you have a dry section on the track. If it's all the way around, then you can run those tires the entire race. They're not going to wear because of just the speed you're going and the wet track condition. But as soon as it starts to dry up, what you'll see is maybe like the track will be drying up and they'll be on inters, and the drivers will actually pull off the dry line into the wet to cool the tires back down to the right operating temperature before the next corner. So you get this weird section where it's like, yeah, I'm on inters, we're not quite ready for slicks, but I can't stay on this line that's drying up, or else my tires are going to get too hot. So you almost kind of have to cool them off and put them in the water. So those are kind of some of the kind of interesting dynamics you get when you get into the wet tires.
Okay, Barcelona this weekend. What's your podium look like? Is there anybody are we going to see Esteban Ocon close to the top again, or is it just like, nah, that was your weekend, that was your podium for the year, now step back and then let your Red Bulls, your Fernando Alonso's, your Mercedes even take over Barcelona? Or is there a shot this weekend that somebody else could really outperform what their car has shown us so far this year?
I think there's definitely a shot given all the upgrades coming and the potential of it being a really hot race with more tire fall off than we've seen. So that'll just bring out relative advantages that we haven't seen yet. As far as predictions, man, I don't know how you would bet against Max. So money on the line, Max is the clear leader for this weekend. But Alonso, home race, just continuing that swagger. Even a photo of him on the podium in Monaco, he had one foot on the first place podium as he was standing on the second place podium. It just kind of like as a jab. He's like, I'm coming for you, man. So I think he has the mentality. And Ocon, I really believe that Alpine has some swagger. They kind of got called out by their CEO as like, you guys are garbage. Why are we even running? And so like Otmar's, having to turn things around. And I think they can carry that momentum. As much as my heart would love to see Ferrari get a podium, I'm not feeling it right now. So it's going to be an interesting weekend. I think no matter what, I think that we're going to learn a lot this weekend for how the rest of the season will play out.
All right. Well, there it is. We're going to be breaking it down again next week. So this is a rare preview and review all in the same episode here. So you got a little bit of the breakdown of Monaco, and then after the Memorial Day weekend where we saw the Coca-Cola 600 and the Indianapolis 500, which that tire flying into the crowd and then over the crowd and missing everybody and hitting that dude's car out in the parking lot, like that was disaster averted because the 90s saw IndyCar in the Indianapolis 500 with a couple of deaths in the stands because of debris going in there. When that tire went into that stands at 200 miles an hour and went over it and missed the crowd and just hit a car, and everybody made jokes about just this guy's car getting smashed. That was disaster averted, so that was good for this weekend. But racing this weekend was pretty darn fun to watch, and we're going to be back at it again. Dan Jimenez is going to get back to zooming in on his computer of all the different wing setups and floor setups and drooling over some of the engineering for this weekend at Barcelona. So for Dan Jimenez, I'm Alex Keary. Thanks for joining us for another week of Mode Push. We're going to be back again breaking down your race for this weekend in Barcelona. So for Dan, I'm Alex. Dan, thanks for hanging out again, man. We love it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, there you go. We'll be back next week. See you then, everybody.